wanted you to know that Dan wasn't feeling well this afternoon, and apparently between Robin, Karen, and Henry, they were able to convince him to go home. So Dan went home with Robin, but he's not feeling well this afternoon, so we'll miss him this afternoon. So I think we left off on prudent borrowing, and the book kind of asked the question of how do you determine what is wise as far as getting into debt, and what kind of debt would be wise to get into. And I think we looked at several principles last week, and so we'll pick up with the last question. Unless there's any comments on this, I think we worked through all of these. Unless there's any comments, we'll go into the last question, which is what are the pros and cons of churches going into debt? So, and the book talks a little bit about that, and some of you may have even seen this in other congregations that you've been at. So, anyway, pros and cons of churches going into debt.
Is that lesson 9 or 10?
We're in lesson 9, and we're on question 7. Yes. We will go into 10 tonight. This is the last question of lesson 9, and then we will go into lesson 10 after 9. Okay, Mike?
I was involved in a church that they borrowed in order to build a building to meet in, but they borrowed it from a member who was part of her retirement, and she decided to be able to loan it. She didn't need those retirement funds right away. She loaned it to the congregation then made payments back or paid it off earlier than expected, so that she still had it for her retirement, but she didn't charge an interest into us, and was able to allow that building to be built. Because otherwise, if you have to try to gain enough funds to build a building like that, it's very difficult for most congregations, I would say, to have that as a building.
So in that case, one of the members basically provided the loan at no interest, which is actually kind of an Old Testament principle for Israel to not charge interest to their brethren. Okay, Debbie, you had your hand up?
Well, I was studying the book mentioned it, which was if, for example, the church splits, who pays the bill? And if they don't pay the bill, then that causes a very bad reflection for the congregation.
Okay. Yeah, the book does mention, and apparently I'm not aware of this occurring, but I'm sure that it has, where churches went and got the loan to build the building, and then some issue came up within the church. Maybe they split, and then it's hard to figure out who's going to pay, and then or the ones that are left behind have to pay more, kind of thing. Using our example here in this congregation, our auditorium, the back wall used to be about where the Keens are. That was the back wall of and the Warringtons. All of the little baby girls in that row there. But that was the back row of our auditorium, or the back of our auditorium. And a lot of things lined up for us to be able to add on to that building. We definitely saw God's hand in it. Yes. Yeah, so where the foyer is now was basically a driveway that was covered with an awning, and so you could drive up and drop people off. And then we had a very small foyer. But yeah, so we did a lot of praying. We met with the congregation. We were able to get a construction loan with a good interest rate through one of our members, actually. The architects said it was going to be over $600,000, and Brother Hawes had Rick, a guy that had done a lot of work for him, Rick Thiel, and he looked at the plans and he said, well, I can do that for $300,000. And it's about half of what the architects estimated. Because we built it out over a driveway, we weren't covering up any additional ground, so we didn't have to do like stormwater drainage kind of thing. We thought we were going to have to do septic, and they came and inspected our septic system, and they said it's good for the increased capacity. We didn't have to increase parking. Dan, because of his proximity to Lewis Funeral Chapel, frequently, as he mentioned on his sermon this morning, frequently will go and speak at somebody's funeral that doesn't have a minister to speak at, and they let us use their chapel for free while we were under construction. Just door after door opened for us to be able to do this, so we were very blessed. And the generosity of this congregation, we paid the note off in under 4 years. So, what's that? Yeah, we went to Parametrics. I just remembered, I was trying to think of the name of the engineering firm. Just down a little bit below Denny's on Kitsap Way, there's a Parametrics engineering building there, and we rented out the basement. And so we met there on other times than Sunday morning. So anyway, that was probably more of a lesson in the providence of God in opening that door. But the book does mention that there can be problems when you're adding on or building buildings, kind of thing. So I wanted to mention that, and I don't know that I have anything more on that. Any other comments or thoughts on pros and cons of churches and borrowing? Yes.
If you have a small congregation and you have big dreams, going for a big loan may not be wise. However, at the same time, if you have a middle to fair-sized congregation that doesn't contribute much, and therefore your discretionary balance isn't all that great, and you want a loan because of your big dreams, again, that's something that
Right.
needs to be probably discussed at length
Yep.
before entered into.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Well, we're going to move into the next lesson then, and I think I actually have slides for this.
Hey Randy, I was involved with getting a building going one time, and a good friend of mine, Jim Turner, and me went into the bank to talk to him about getting a loan, and the first thing he asked was, well, when was your church established? And I said, 8033? When did you go, when did you have services here? But I thought it was funny.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity. Good opportunity to sow the seed there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next lesson here, which is on bankruptcy. Well, maybe it was. Okay, we'll just enjoy this nice view of.
It's where you live when you lose everything.
I guess there's a nice little tunnel over there. By the way, I left my thumb drive at home, so we were reusing last week's slides because my thumb drive is at my office up the hill here. That's okay. We can press on without it. So this next lesson is on. We're on lesson 10. We're on bankruptcy. The author of the booklet mentions that over 500,000. Actually, I don't know if he mentioned the number of cases in 2024. I looked it up. There was 2 million cases of bankruptcy in 2005. In last year, there were over 500,000 cases of bankruptcy filed. And so the first question is, what is a good definition of bankruptcy? And I don't know that there's necessarily a good definition. Maybe there's an accurate definition of bankruptcy. But anyway, a definition of bankruptcy, what did you find for that? Okay, Roger.
Well, isn't it outspending your earnings in bankruptcy? If you can't afford to pay for anything and you eventually get further and further behind, you can't keep up. You file bankruptcy.
Okay, so you're no longer able to make your payments?
Right.
You're no longer able to meet the obligations of whatever the loan was? Okay. Anybody else have a thought? Okay. I just looked it up, and there was, of course, a myriad of things that you can find on your either desktop or your handheld little computing device that we all have. I found from Investopedia.com. Sounds like a reputable site. Bankruptcy is a legal process for relieving debt that the borrower cannot repay, which is what Roger said. It's a measure of last resort that typically requires liquidating assets, which means selling off what you have, or entering a repayment plan. Bankruptcy is a way to get a fresh financial start as an individual or a business if you cannot repay your debts. Typically requires filing a petition with a bankruptcy court. From there, a judge decides whether you must liquidate any of your assets or if the debt can be restructured to satisfy as much of your obligation as possible. And so the three key takeaways that I got from that is that bankruptcy offers a legal path to debt relief, but that comes with lasting financial consequences, including credit damage and potential loss of assets. And the type of bankruptcy you qualify for determines whether your debts are either discharged or restructured or repaid. And before filing for bankruptcy, consider alternatives like negotiating with creditors or exploring loan modifications to minimize the long-term financial harm. I saw this from WashingtonConsolidation.org, and I wanted to get to the middle part of this, but help for Washington residents with unmanageable payments. These consolidation options offers low monthly payments for Washington residents. Consolidation options are available for individuals, families, and businesses. When balances rise and finances become overwhelming, many feel it is impossible to break the cycle. So they're feeling this burden, and then basically they offer a means of getting around that. Okay, so that's kind of the introduction to bankruptcy, and I'm picking this up like I'm going to go to the next slide, and I just remembered I don't have the next slide. So the next question in this book is, what biblical principles suggest or show that it is sinful to walk away and not pay one's debt? So what biblical principles are there that maybe this isn't the avenue that we should try to go down? I'll give you a hint. One of them is in the margin. And we'll probably start there, so you might as well turn, unless somebody's going to call it out for me. Psalm 37. Let's go to Psalm 37. Everybody had such good naps this afternoon. Biblical principles that show or suggest that it is sinful to walk away and not pay one's debt. You're thinking? Okay. While Sam is thinking, I'd like to get somebody to read Psalm 37 and verses 16 through 21. Read it nice and loud for us. Psalm 37. Jonathan.
Better is the little that the righteous has than the abundance of many wicked. For the arms of the wicked shall be broken, but the Lord upholds the righteous. The Lord knows the days of the blameless, and their heritage will remain forever. They are not put to shame in evil times. In the days of famine they have abundance. But the wicked will perish. The enemies of the Lord are like the glory of the pastures. They vanish like smoke, they vanish away. The wicked borrows, but does not pay back, but the righteous is generous and gives.
Okay. And I think the author is pointing to verse 21 there, that the psalmist is pointing out that the wicked borrows but doesn't repay. So I think that's the category that we do not want to be in, known as a wicked person. So I think there's a principle there. Okay, what other principles are there for to not repaying what we said we would repay?
I suppose you could use Romans 13:8 that talks to owe no one anything except to love one another, for you encourage that you are paying your debts.
Okay.
You make a case for that anyway.
Okay, and we've been studying that on Sunday morning, and I think we've made it pretty clear that that's not precluding you from owning a home or making payments to the bank and to the county tax assessor for living in your home. Mike?
The golden rule, Matthew 7:12, do unto you. If you had loaned some money to somebody, would you want them to repay you?
Yes.
So therefore, you should treat them the same
Yes.
way and not cheat them out or purposely not pay. There are times where you can't help it.
Right.
But that's where you knowingly don't repay what you couldn't repay.
And what do we call that rule again?
The goal.
Oh, it's the golden rule. Oh, it's the golden rule. Okay, so you treat others the way you would want to be treated. So if you loan something out, you would hope to get it back. So that's the way you would want to be treated. So we want to treat others the same way. That's also, I think you mentioned Matthew 7.
7:12, yeah.
Matthew 7:12. It's also in Luke chapter 6 and verse 31. Okay. Yes.
All over the place, talking about how God is about truth and Satan is about lies, and the whole concept of honesty is when you enter into a loan, you're agreeing at the outset that you'll pay it back. So
Absolutely. So we want to honor our word that we said that we would do, and so that's a great principle. I think the author mentions Matthew 5, and we can look over there, Matthew chapter 5, and we could get another reader to read verse 33 through 37. Matthew 5, verse 33 through 37. Yes.
again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, or for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil.
Okay, so be careful about the oaths that you make, and I think there's several examples of rash oaths being made in the Old Testament. The next thing that comes out of the tent, and it ended up being I'm trying to remember who that was.
Japheth.
Was it Jacob?
Japheth.
Japheth, that's right. Japheth's rash oath there, and yeah. So we want to make sure that our yes is yes and that our no is no. Okay, any other principles?
I have a very simple rule in my life. God has been gracious enough to see that all my basic needs are covered. And people are taken aback when I tell them I own neither a credit card nor a debit card. And if I can't pay cash for it, I don't get it.
Okay.
And I stick very rigidly to that rule.
Yeah, and that I think that's a good way to go, and that helps guide what you're trying to do. On the other side of that, there's nothing wrong if you use those, as long as you're paying them. But it's very easy when you're using a little plastic card and swiping it. Well, yeah, I think I have enough in there, because you don't ever see the numbers going. So yeah, it's definitely, and I've seen some people get into trouble with that.
Well, it's no fun to be behind somebody in line in the store, and they're trying half a dozen different cards.
Wow. Okay, so that kind of brings us to the next question, which is, what steps can a Christian take to avoid the possibility and probability of bankruptcy? And kind of, I guess I'm going to, since Fluffy brought that up, I'm going to start with I'm going to say number 1 and number 2 rules, and then we'll continue from there. But what should our first rule of finances be as we are going through our lives?
Stay within your means.
Okay, so spend less than you are bringing in. So living within your means. I would say even above that is seek first seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then all these things will be added unto you. So seek first the kingdom of God and then live within your means. And that's kind of Fluffy's means of living within her means is she uses cash. So when she's got enough cash for it, then she'll buy it, which is good. We've used envelopes before, and envelopes for different things and saving for various things, and that works out pretty good. So I think the author kind of brings out one of the things that I'm gonna back up a little bit here, but he brings up that we avoid other things and other actions in our lives. For example, if you go over to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, we can go over there real quick. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. For whatever reason, it's taking me longer to get over there. Here we go. So, how do we avoid fornication? Do we try to get as close as we can without crossing a line? Or do we do what the Lord says in 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 18, which is flee sexual immorality? And we have plenty of examples of this. We have Joseph with Potiphar's wife who kept coming after him, and he literally fled out of the house naked. That was, he fled that. And then we have Jesus' example back in Matthew chapter 5 of, it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you, this is verse 28 of Matthew 5, whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. So cut it out. Don't even go down that path. And so that's kind of the same actions that we use to avoid that. We can do the same, apply that same to our money and our finances. If I don't have enough cash for a particular item, I'm going to wait until I've set aside enough cash for it. I think that's pretty wise. So what are some other steps that we can take to avoid the probability or the possibility? Tim?
Counting the cost, Luke 14.
Okay, good. So Luke 14 and verse 28, which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? And so what's the result of someone who did not count the cost and then started to build? What ends up happening?
Got halfway or wasn't able to finish it.
Okay. You're not able to finish the project. And what else happens?
You can become easily overwhelmed.
Okay, you can become overwhelmed. Jesus says, this is Luke 14 and verse 29, lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. So I think there's also some reputation tarnishing there. Is kind of what Jesus is alluding to. Sam?
Sometimes, though, you can attack building and things iteratively. In many places that I visited, I was always surprised that I could see someone that was obviously living in a building site where they had gotten enough material, enough time, enough whatever, and put in the first floor, the first level. And there's rebar sticking up everywhere, and there's blocks floating around, but they obviously haven't gotten enough to put on the next level yet.
Yep.
Still prudent to begin sometimes. I mean, it's
Yes.
a function of prudence.
Yes.
It's also imprudent to, live in the rain while you save your money and maybe die of exposure while you're waiting, when instead you could perhaps take a prudent loan or help from brothers or something to get yourself uncovered.
Yes.
Prudence seems to be the watchword, I think.
Yes. I'll just say I was able to go up and help Mark with his cabin up in Alaska, and it's about 15 miles outside of Fairbanks. And there are myriads of scales of dwellings that you will see in Alaska. Alaskans are interesting, have interesting character. Some have blue tarps, and others have completed homes, but various homes in various stages of assembly. Very interesting. Okay, any other thoughts? All right, so I have a couple, and this is going to take us back into Proverbs. So let's go back into Proverbs. And let's get a reader in Proverbs chapter 6. And let's read verses 6 through 8. Sam from the back.
Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? You said 6 through 9, correct?
I said through 8, but that's okay. So I think we can learn from this that as you go to Ecclesiastes 3, there's a time to gather. So we're all at different seasons in our lives, and there's definitely a season where we need to be building and setting aside and continuing to be active and working. And the key here is providing the supplies in the summer, gathering her food in the harvest. So there was a time to gather and to do that. And if you go back to Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 5, he who gathers in the summer is a wise son, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who causes shame. And so the wise son is gathering in the summer. In the season when it's time to gather, the wise son is out there and doing the things to gather. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? Yes, John.
A number of years ago, I had an opportunity to work with a couple who were members of the congregation where we were, and they were in financial difficulty. They could not figure out what was going on, and they were even thinking about bankruptcy. I went over and I worked with them, and we just put together a very simple budget, and a budget is not hard to do. You just have one column where you have all your income, the other column where you list all your expenses, and you see where the money's going. It actually turned out that this couple had approximately $3,500 in discretionary income and had no idea where it was going. Aside from their regular expenses as compared to what they had coming in, they were spending frivolously and had no idea what they were spending it on. They had no idea where it was going, what it was for, and we kind of put together a plan to stop all of that, and they finally got a hold of themselves financially and were able to straighten out.
So they took a step back and actually took a look at where everything was going and realized that they were able to get themselves out of it.
Yeah, it kind of came down to what you were talking about earlier, where you have that little card and you just keep putting that card in the machine and keep spending, and pretty soon you don't know what you spent it on and where it's going.
Yep. Great. Good example. So, Jonathan.
I think what John just shared kind of highlights something that I haven't really heard us talk about much. I think it's really good that we've been going to the Bible to look for what it says on how we should do our best to live within our means and to use what we have. But there's a lot to be said for going to somebody for help to figure things out when you don't seem to have the mind or the head or the ability to do it yourself. And to be somebody who can be patient and come alongside them and work through that when, especially when it becomes apparent. I mean, $3,500 is a lot of money to be spending without any idea where it's going. But it sounds like, at least from John's account of it, he sat with him and worked through it instead of balking and walking away at that point. And that's commendable. I think there's a lot to be said for that, and I think that it shouldn't go unnoticed that we have people here who are willing to help and willing to come alongside and might have mind to do that. For
Yes.
those that don't.
Yes, and so not only you have somebody who's willing to help, but you also had somebody who was willing to accept the help
Yes.
and accept the direction and accept that, oh, we were going this way and we need to adjust our course a little bit, and maybe I don't need to buy my coffee at certain locations.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to make my coffee at home. Okay, Sam.
And sometimes I think it highlights as we look at, some of us have never made a budget. I suspect. I had never made a budget until I was 2 years away from retirement and was asking myself, how much money do I need to be retired?
Mm-hmm.
So we went through it, some things were easy to predict, okay, I know what I pay for housing. I have some guesses at many of these things. Interestingly enough, I had no clue what I spent at the grocery store. But they were those points you could get, little blue points or something, so you could get a pan or something. And we actually knew how many points we had gathered at our one and only place we bought groceries. And it was illuminating for us to find out, so that's how much I spent on groceries. Some of us need help figuring out tools for, so what are our expenses? That's the one great thing about the cool little card that can get you in so much trouble. They give you very good records. You can go back later and figure out. So that's where my money is going. You just have to lump it in.
You have to learn how to rein it in before you put it on the card.
Right,
So,
but it's an interesting tool to be able to teach you about where is your money actually going, so you can then use some self-analysis.
Yep.
Is that what it should be? That seems right. Or, yeah, okay, that's right.
and there are a number of tools available for doing those exact things of budgeting and figuring out where your money's going. Dick.
One good thing is to have a spouse that knows what she's doing. I was an idiot, just a kid, 19 years old when we got married. And she had already been working, and she knew what she was doing, and that's what made ours work.
And
So I listened to her, and I learned a lot from her. So use the people that you have.
Yep. And work together, absolutely.
Yeah.
John?
The one thing that keeps coming to mind with what everybody's talking about with asking for help is a great thing, but the one thing that hinders us is having to get over ourselves and be able to ask for help. And that's what you just brought up a little while ago. But if somebody comes to me and says, can you help me with this? I'm going to say, absolutely. And the next Sunday morning, I'm not going to walk up to the front of the congregation and say, guess what they just did? I'm going to keep it quiet.
Right.
I'm going to be willing to. By the way, that couple that I worked with, that was $3,500 a month in discretionary income.
Ouch.
So, okay. Kathy?
I think we have to also remember that how we spend our money, we're setting an example for our children. If they see us buying and then always saying, gee, we don't have enough money, if they see us charging all the time, then they're gonna think that's the way to get things. And that they have to realize that it's okay to charge, but you always have to have that money in the bank to pay it.
Yep.
And too easily, I remember once my son said, well, just charge it. And I said, well, you still have to pay for it. You do? And I said, yeah. So, I think it's important that you teach your children from a very young age. You are their example.
Yep.
If you
Yep.
don't set a good one, then you don't know what might happen.
Right. Great comment to make sure that we're teaching our children and setting the example for our children as well.
Randy,
Yep.
somebody in my family says, why don't you get the church to help you? I said, because scripture says you must ask your family first.
Okay. So great point. I think the scriptures are pretty clear about who we can help and how we help them, and we try to do our best to follow that and follow that example. Okay. We got a few minutes left. We're going to try to cruise along here. Oh, Cindy.
One thing in a family is a good idea too, though, is that there's communication between each other about how much, where it's going. You know, like, example, Roger and I. He said, take it over after there was a discrepancy in the bank. And he said, I don't want to have that anymore. So now he asked to make sure that we have the money before it's taken out. Because way back when is when you put the check in the bank, but he drew money out from that check as cash and didn't tell me. So when I did the bills, I started getting NSF checks and notices, and I couldn't figure out why, because I still had $4.20 in the check. So there's no way we could have been overdrawn. So we went to the bank, and luckily we knew the lady, and she went through everything with us, and sure enough, he had taken out maybe like $20, but still it was that $20 that was going to the bills. From that point on, we always talk to each other first to make sure that it's there, and that communication is very important, I believe, in a family.
Absolutely.
I'm no longer the banker.
You're no longer the banker?
I think you also need to have somebody that can do 1 + 1 = 3.
3, yes.
That's why we need to.
Okay. Okay. Good call. So you got to work together. You can't play I Got a Secret. Okay, I like that. Question 4 is what are the common types of bankruptcy? And this is kind of more of a, for your information kind of a thing. I learned a lot when I got to this part of the question. Anybody have some common types of bankruptcy? We'll briefly discuss these. Tim?
The one I'm thinking of is not gonna be for this spiritual bankruptcy, is what I keep thinking of.
Okay.
And that's where people are, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, and they're just not treasuring up things in heaven.
Okay. And that type of bankruptcy has eternal consequences, doesn't it? Okay. Okay, David?
I think financially it's 7, 11, and 13, so it's either partial, complete bankruptcy, or corporate bankruptcy.
Yep. And there's actually more than those, but those are the 3 that were mentioned in the book. And 7 is where the assets are sold, the money is distributed to the creditors, the remainder of the debt is legally erased. Certain assets are excluded from liquidation, maybe house, cars, or Social Security, that type of thing. And anyway, there's a bit of information on that on the chapter 7 of bankruptcy, and it also includes some things like student loan debt can be difficult to have discharged, but it's not impossible. And you'll face financial scrutiny through the means test to determine you're going to file for Chapter 7 or 13. Chapter 11 is typically used by businesses and corporations, and it's rare to be used by individuals. It can help a business keep operating while its debts are reorganized and repaid over time. So at least you're eventually paying part of what is owed. Chapter 13 is the wage earner's plan and reorganizes your debts through repayment plan that the debtor proposes. Under Chapter 13, individuals with regular income agree to repay all or some of their debts by paying installments to creditors over 3 to 5 years. And there are certain eligibility requirements. Chapter 9 is for municipalities and school districts. Chapter 12 is for family farmers or fishermen. And Chapter 15 has to do with foreign bankruptcy cases. I don't know that many of us would have a part in that. So we just have a few minutes here. Let's try to at least touch on question 5, and this is kind of from page 77. And we'll try to wrap up the lesson next week as we go into lesson 11. But the question 5 is, what Bible passages or examples would authorize a Christian to find a legal means for not paying what they promised to pay? So this is kind of a... Oh.
You had 40 seconds, you thought you had 7 minutes.
Oh. Okay.
But carry on.
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll just pick up with this next week, because this is kind of a can of worms question, because you start getting into, because really if you're going to look for examples of getting out of debt from the scriptures, you're going to kind of point back to Deuteronomy, and so we'll have a little discussion about that next week, which kind of opens up the law. What part of the law are we under? Are we under any part of the law? That whole question. So we will pick up with question 5 next week. I really appreciate your participation tonight. Thank you. I think, like this morning, Mike's got a couple songs for us, and then we're going to do some announcements. Is there anybody here tonight that needs to share in the Lord's Supper? Okay, we have a few. Roger can lead singing.